It was 6:47 in the morning when Nolan Fitch walked into the Hargrove and Associates law firm with a mop bucket and a set of master keys clipped to his belt. He wasn't supposed to be there that early. His shift started at 7, but the night janitor had called out sick, and Nolan had been covering since 4, mopping marble floors that cost more per square foot than his monthly rent, emptying wastebaskets full of printouts he wasn't supposed to read but couldn't help seeing, legal briefs, case numbers, names. He'd been reading legal documents since he was 19, sitting at a library table with a highlighter and a borrowed copy of Black's Law Dictionary, trying to understand why his mother had lost her house. The firm's main conference room was on the 14th floor. Glass walls. A long oak table that seated 20. At 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, it held 7 people, 6 partners and 1 associate, all in suits, all looking at a document spread across the center of the table like a patient on an operating table. Nolan pushed his cart past the glass and didn't look in. He almost made it to the supply closet. "Hey." The voice came from behind the glass. One of the partners had opened the door, a man named Clifford Bain, 63 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore cufflinks on casual Fridays. "You, come in here a moment." Nolan stopped. He turned around. He looked at Bain the way he'd learned to look at partners. Neutral, unhurried, like nothing they said could surprise him. "Sir, come in. Close the door behind you." He left the cart in the hallway and walked in. The room smelled like coffee and expensive cologne. The 6 partners sat in their chairs. The associate, a young woman named Petra Wynne, 28, 2 years out of Yale Law, stood near the window with her arms crossed, her face carefully blank. The document on the table was a 140-page commercial lease agreement. Nolan could see the header from where he stood. Alderton Properties LLC v. Hargrove and Associates. Bain sat down and picked up a pen. He tapped it against the table twice. "We've got a problem," he said, "and we've been sitting here for 2 hours. He looked at Nolan the way people look at furniture when they're thinking out loud. Not dismissively, exactly, but not quite like he was looking at a person either. "The client is coming in at 9. We have a conflict in Section 12 of this agreement that nobody can reconcile. It touches indemnification, subrogation, and a force majeure clause that's written in a way none of us have seen before." One of the other partners, a woman named Harriet Cole, 50s, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, made a small sound. "Clifford, what are you doing?" "I'm thinking out loud. He's the janitor, I'm aware of that." Bain looked at Nolan again. This time it was different. There was something in his eyes, not respect, not yet, but a kind of calculation. "You, what's your name?" "Nolan. Nolan what?" "Fitch, Mr. Fitch." Bain uncapped his pen. "Have you ever read a commercial lease agreement?" The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight. Nolan looked at the document on the table. He looked at Bain. He looked at Harriet Cole, who was looking at him like she already knew the answer and found the question embarrassing. "Yes," Nolan said. Bain pushed the document toward the empty chair at the end of the table. "Sit down." Nolan Fitch had grown up in Decatur, Georgia, the second of 3 children. His father drove a bus. His mother cleaned offices, not unlike what Nolan did now, except she'd cleaned medical offices, which meant sharps containers and biohazard bags and the particular smell of antiseptic that he still associated with her coming home tired. She'd been smart. Everyone who knew her said so. She'd had a year of community college before she got pregnant with Nolan's older brother. And then there wasn't money for more, and then there wasn't time, and then there was a diagnosis. His father's heart, damaged at 51, and then there was the mortgage, and then there was the lawsuit. The lawsuit was about the mortgage. A predatory lending situation. The kind that was common enough in their neighborhood in the mid-2000s that it almost didn't feel like a crime, except it was. Nolan was 17 when it happened. He sat in the back of a courtroom and watched a lawyer he'd never met explain to a judge why his family's house belonged to a bank. And he didn't understand most of the words being used, but he understood the outcome. They lost the house. His mother moved in with her sister. His father moved into a 1-bedroom apartment. Nolan slept on his cousin's couch for 8 months and studied for his GED with a flashlight because the living room light kept his cousin's baby awake. He passed the GED. He enrolled at Georgia Perimeter College. He took 2 years of pre-law coursework before the money ran out. He didn't give up on law. He just found a different way to stay inside it. He'd been with Hargrove and Associates for 4 years. He knew every floor. He knew which partners stayed late and which ones left early. He knew, from reading discarded drafts in the recycling bins he was paid to empty, how a motion to compel was structured, how a deposition summary read, how settlement negotiations were documented in internal memos that smelled like toner and someone's bad decision. He'd never told anyone at the firm any of this. There had never been a reason to. He sat down at the end of the table. Harriet Cole had her arms crossed. She wasn't hostile, exactly. She was careful. There's a difference. Nolan pulled the document toward him and started at section 12. The room watched him. He read slowly. Not because he was struggling, because he was building. There's a kind of reading you do when you already know what you're looking for. And there's a kind of reading you do when you have to understand a thing from the ground up. Nolan was doing the second kind, because the language in this clause was unusual. Whoever had drafted it had wrapped a standard force majeure provision inside an indemnification framework in a way that created a circular obligation, each party indemnifying the other against claims arising from events that were themselves defined by the indemnification terms. It was a loop, a self-referential clause that would be unenforceable as written, because no court could determine which obligation triggered first. He found the conflict at paragraph 12. CI. He read it twice. He looked up. The force majeure definition in 12 includes failure of essential services, he said, but in 12, Psi, failure of essential services is listed as a triggering event for the indemnification obligation. That means the force majeure excuse and the indemnification trigger are using the same predicate event, but they produce opposite outcomes. One excuses performance. The other creates liability. He paused. They can't both apply to the same event. The clause is internally contradictory. No one spoke. Petra Wynne unfolded her arms. Bain set down his pen. Harriet Cole looked at the document. Then she looked at Nolan. Then she looked at the document again, the way you look at something when you realize you've been seeing it wrong. That's the conflict, she said quietly. Yes. We've been looking at the subrogation language for 2 hours, said one of the other partners. A younger man named Reed Ashby, 30s, sharp face, the kind of lawyer who billed 300 hours a month and was proud of it. He didn't look pleased. He looked like a man who'd just been told he'd been searching for his keys in the wrong pocket. Subrogation language was a distraction. The subrogation language is fine, Nolan said. It's standard. The problem is 12. Reed looked at him for a long moment. Who are you? Nolan Fitch. I clean your office on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. The first silence had been skeptical. This one had a different texture, something between discomfort and recalibration. Bain picked up his pen again. He clicked it once. Can it be fixed before 9? Nolan looked at the clock on the wall. It was 7:03. The simplest fix is to add a carve-out in 12, explicitly excluding force majeure events from the indemnification trigger. One sentence. It aligns with how most commercial leases handle this. He paused. You'd want your attorneys to draft it, but that's the direction. Bain nodded slowly. He looked at Petra. Get it drafted. Use his language as the framework. Petra was already writing. Reed Ashby stood up and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room, looking out at the Atlanta skyline, and Nolan understood. Not from anything, Reed said, but from the set of his shoulders, that this was a man deciding something, whether to be embarrassed or to be angry, or to find a way to be neither. Reed chose a fourth option. He turned around. He walked to the end of the table. He extended his hand. Reed Ashby, he said. Nolan stood and shook it. I know. You're in 1407. You leave your lights on. Reed laughed, short and surprised, like a cough. I do. Nolan went back to his cart. He finished the 14th floor. He took the service elevator to 15 and started on the executive suite. He mopped the hallway outside Bain's office, refilled the paper towel dispensers in the restrooms, replaced a burned-out bulb in the copy room. At 8:40, Petra found him in the supply closet. She looked different from the conference room. Less careful, like she'd decided something too. Can I ask you something? Yes. How do you know all that? He kept stacking paper towel rolls. I read, everybody reads, I read what I clean up after. He turned around. Your firm goes through about 40 pounds of paper per floor per week. Most of it's drafts, some of it's correspondence, some of it's research memos. I've been reading your recycling bins for 4 years. Petra looked at him steadily. That's not creepy at all. I don't read the personal stuff, just the legal documents. Right. She leaned against the doorframe. Why didn't you go to law school? The question was so direct it almost felt rude, but it wasn't rudely meant. He could tell the difference. Money, he said, then time, then money again. She nodded, not in a sympathetic way, in the way someone nods when they're filing something away. Bain wants to talk to you. After the 9 o'clock meeting, I have floors to finish. I think this might be more important than your floors. Nolan looked at her. He thought about his mother, who had cleaned offices for 31 years and never once been offered a chair at a table. He thought about the library in Decatur, where he'd spent 3 years reading every legal textbook they had. He thought about the recycling bins and the drafts and the 140 pages on the conference room table and the loop in paragraph 12C that 7 lawyers had sat in front of for 2 hours without seeing. Tell him I'll be there at 10, Nolan said. I need to finish my shift. Petra smiled. It was small, but it was real. I'll tell him. The 9 o'clock meeting went well. Nolan heard this secondhand from the receptionist, Gwen, who heard it from the associate who brought coffee in, who overheard Bain telling the client that a conflict in Section 12 had been identified and resolved. The client, a commercial real estate developer named Whitmore, had apparently been relieved. He'd had concerns about that clause himself and had raised them twice to his own counsel, who told him twice that it was standard language. It wasn't standard language. Nobody had looked closely enough. At 10 o'clock, Nolan knocked on the door of Clifford Bain's office. Come in. The office was large and intentionally understated. No diplomas on the wall. That was a junior lawyer thing, Bain had once said, in a quote Nolan had read in a profile the Georgia Bar Association published 2 years ago. One window, a desk with nothing on it but a legal pad and a photograph of 3 grown children. Bain was standing by the window when Nolan came in. Sit down, he said. Nolan sat. Bain remained standing. He looked out the window for a moment, then he turned. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. All right. How much law do you actually know? Nolan considered the question. It wasn't a small question. I know what I've taught myself, he said, which is a lot of contracts, some torts, a fair amount of civil procedure, and enough property law to understand what happened to my family when I was 17. He paused. I don't have a degree. I'm not licensed. I can see problems. I'm not always certain I can solve them. That depends on the problem. Bain nodded. He sat down behind his desk. He put his hands flat on the legal pad. We have a paralegal opening, he said. It's been open for 6 weeks because we can't find someone who reads documents the way we need them read. He paused. It's not glamorous, it's detail work. Long hours. The pay is... He named a number. It was 3 times what Nolan made cleaning floors. Nolan didn't react to the number. He'd learned from reading deposition transcripts that the first person who reacts to a number loses ground. I'd want to think about it, he said. Bain raised an eyebrow. Most people don't ask to think about a job offer. Most people don't get offered one while they're still holding a mop. Nolan said it without heat. It was just a fact. I need to make sure it's the right move. I have obligations. His younger brother, Marcus, 19, finishing his first year at Georgia State on a partial scholarship. The difference between Marcus's scholarship and Marcus's tuition was $400 a month. Nolan had been covering it for 8 months. At the paralegal salary, $400 a month would become possible in a way it currently wasn't, but only if the position was stable. He needed to know if it was stable. How long has Hargrove been operating, he asked. Bain looked at him. 37 years. And the firm's current caseload, is it diversified enough to weather a downtown real estate correction? Because 60% of what I've read in your recycling bins in the last year has been commercial real estate. If that market softens, Bain held up a hand, not dismissively, more like a man stopping a car that's going somewhere unexpected. You've been reading our case mix from the recycling. I told you I read what I clean up after. There was a pause, and then Clifford Bain did something Nolan hadn't expected. He laughed. It was a real laugh, low, surprised, not unkind. The laugh of a man who finds something genuinely unexpected and decides, after a moment, to be delighted by it rather than unsettled. The firm is diversified, Bain said when the laugh had faded. We expanded into employment litigation and healthcare compliance 2 years ago. The real estate concentration you're seeing is from a single large client. Whitmore, actually. The man you helped us keep this morning. Nolan nodded. Take the time you need, Bain said. 24 hours. Then let me know. Nolan finished his shift. He took the service elevator down to the parking garage, changed out of his uniform in the locker room, and drove home to the apartment he shared with his brother in Cabottown. A two-bedroom on the third floor of a building that had been an old warehouse, the kind of neighborhood where the coffee shop on the corner was expensive and the laundromat on the next block wasn't. Marcus was at the kitchen table when he came in, a textbook open in front of him and a half-eaten bowl of cereal beside it. He was studying for a statistics exam. He was the reason Nolan had stayed in Atlanta instead of taking a job offer in Charlotte 2 years ago. He was the reason Nolan had picked up the extra night shifts when the other janitor got sick. He was the reason, if Nolan was honest with himself, which he tried to be, that Nolan had kept reading, kept learning, kept walking into buildings full of people who would never expect anything from him. You work hard enough in secret long enough, he'd told Marcus once, and you stop doing it to prove anything to anybody. You just do it because it's who you are now. Marcus looked up when Nolan came in. "You look weird," he said. "I got offered a job." Marcus put down his pencil. "What kind of job?" "Paralegal. At Hargrove." A pause. "The firm you clean?" "Yes." Marcus stared at him. "How?" Nolan sat down in the other chair. He told him. All of it. The early shift, the conference room, the loop in paragraph 12, the silence when he'd looked up from the document and told them what they'd missed. He told it plainly, the way he told most things, without drama, though he knew the drama was in there. It didn't need to be added. It was already there. Marcus listened without interrupting. This was something he'd learned from Nolan, who had learned it from years of reading depositions. The most important information almost always comes when the other person is allowed to finish. When Nolan was done, Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he put his face in his hands, not dramatically. He didn't make any sound. He just put his face in his hands and stayed that way for a moment, his shoulders slightly forward, and Nolan understood, the way you understand things about the people you've spent your whole life next to, that his brother was not upset. He was the opposite of upset. He was feeling something that was too large and too close to put a clean word on. Nolan let him feel it. After a moment, Marcus lifted his head. His eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. "You're gonna take it," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "I'm going to take it." "Good." Marcus picked up his pencil. His voice was steady, but still thick. "It's about time." Harriet Cole found Nolan in the hallway the next morning. She'd been the one in the conference room who said he's the janitor, not cruelly, just accurately, the way a person states a fact to establish a baseline. Nolan hadn't held it against her. He'd held it in his memory, which was different. She stopped him near the elevator bank. "I heard Bain offered you the paralegal position," she said. "He did." She looked at him with the same careful attention she'd given the document in the conference room. "I want you to know, what you did in that meeting was not small. A lot of attorneys miss that kind of structural conflict because they're too close to it. You came in fresh and saw it in under 10 minutes. Nolan nodded. She went on. "I also want you to know that this firm has not always been," she paused, choosing the word, "welcoming to people who come from outside the usual path. I know, I'm telling you because I think you should know it before you commit." She met his eyes. "I think the position is worth taking. I think you should take it. I'm also being honest with you about what you might encounter." It was the most direct thing anyone at the firm had ever said to him. More direct, in a way, than the job offer itself. "I appreciate that," he said. She gave him a brief nod and walked toward the elevator. Then she stopped and turned back. 12 say, she said. "I'll be embarrassed about that for a while." "You'd been in there since 5 in the morning, Nolan said. "We had. Fatigue makes you tunnel. You stop seeing the document and start seeing your theory of the document." He paused. "Happens to everyone." Harriet Cole looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled. Not the cautious smile of someone managing a situation, but the genuine smile of someone who has just realized they like a person. "Monday," she said. "Orientation is at 9. Reed Ashby stopped by the supply closet on Nolan's last shift. Thursday, 2 days later. Nolan was restocking. Reed appeared in the doorway with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the kind of casual that required effort. "I looked you up," Reed said. Nolan kept stacking. "Found much?" 2 years at Georgia Perimeter. Nothing after that. Reed leaned against the doorframe. The same doorframe where Petra had stood 2 days earlier, which felt like something. "You know you'd need at least an associate's degree for the paralegal certification, right? Eventually." "I know, Hargrove will pay for it. It's in the benefits package." He said it like this was information Nolan might not have known. Full tuition reimbursement for paralegal certification programs. I checked. Nolan looked up. Why'd you check? Reed shrugged. It was the kind of shrug that was trying to be casual, and wasn't quite. I looked into it. That's all. He pushed off the doorframe. Monday, right? Monday? Reed nodded. He started to walk away. Then, without turning around, that was a good catch. In the meeting. Nolan went back to his stacking. Thanks, he said. His last shift ended at 3. He returned the master keys to the facilities manager, a woman named Dot, who'd hired him 4 years ago based on a 40-minute interview and a reference from a hotel he'd cleaned before this. Dot shook his hand. She was not a sentimental person, which meant that the handshake was genuine. Come back and visit, she said. I'll be upstairs, he said. She laughed. Same thing. He took the service elevator down for the last time and pushed the cart back to the supply room and hung up his uniform on the hook with his name taped to it, Nolan, on a piece of masking tape he'd put there himself 4 years ago, because there was no hook when he'd started. He turned off the supply room light. He walked to the parking garage. He sat in his car for a minute, not thinking much, just sitting. The city made its sounds around him. Somewhere above him, 14 floors up, a conference room held an oak table and a set of glass walls and an empty chair at the far end, where a man with a mop bucket had sat down one morning and read a document and told 7 lawyers what they couldn't see. He started the car. On Saturday, he would call his mother. He would tell her about the position, about what had happened, about the clause in paragraph 12I that had started all of it. She would ask if it was a good firm. He would tell her about Harriet Cole and what she'd said in the hallway, about the firm not always being welcoming, about the honest warning given anyway. His mother would be quiet for a moment, the way she got quiet when she was deciding whether something was trustworthy. Then she'd say, go anyway. Keep your eyes open, that's all you can do. He already knew she'd say it, he already knew she was right. On Monday morning, Nolan Fitch would take the main elevator. Not the service entrance, not the cart bay, not the door on the side of the building that the cleaning staff used, because it was closer to the supply room. The main elevator, the one with the mirrored walls and the floor numbers in brushed gold, the one that opened directly into the reception area on 14 where Gwen sat behind the desk and greeted every person who stepped off with the same efficient warmth. He would step off. He would say, good morning. He would go to work. And somewhere in a city full of people who had decided, long before meeting him, exactly what he was capable of, Nolan Fitch would sit down at a desk with a stack of documents in front of him and begin, for the first time in his adult life, to do the thing he had taught himself to do in the light of other people's discarded drafts, the thing that had always been true about him, even when no one was looking. He would read.